let's talk about balance in Deadlock. If you've been following the channel for some time, you know that I do videos about meta reports and just the overall state of the game. In the past, I've talked about double soaking and the mechanic, I've talked about different heroes, and I've talked about a lot of things, and I've been following every patch since I've gotten in May. I've seen a ton of different metas where characters have been S tier, from Vindicta to Haze to Seven to Lash dominating to Shiv being the server admin. I've basically seen every character in this game be broken at some point or another. I've seen McGinnis rise from the bottom of D tier to the top of S tier. I've seen all of it at this point. And so I feel like I'm ready to talk about the balance in Deadlock and what the developers have been doing right and what they've maybe been doing wrong. First of all, I want to start with an updated tier list. Before we look at the updated tier list, let's look at the tier list from last week. If we look at the tier list from last week, in S tier, we have 6 characters: Shiv, McGinnis, Geist, Seven, Kelvin, and Infernus. And out of those characters, there are some that were significantly nerfed, particularly Shiv, as well as one specific Lady Geist build around Mystic Reaver. Now, a lot of these other characters weren't significantly changed, and yet the tier list has changed pretty dramatically. If you look at my updated tier list, which I'll show on the screen now, in S tier, I now have Seven, Infernus, Grey Talon, Mirage, and Paradox. To be fair, in the previous tier list, I would have also put Paradox in S tier if I had specified that the tier list was for competitive play. In this specific updated tier list, I am keeping in mind competitive play or high-ranked pubs, and I'm not talking about a tier list that is the same in Archon lobbies. There's always going to be heroes that are much better in lower ranks than they are in higher ranks, and there's always going to be vice versa, heroes that are worse in lower ranks. For example, Paradox, I would say, performs a lot worse in Archon lobbies than she does in Eternus or even Ascendant lobbies. With that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about the job that the balance team has done with Deadlock. I hear quite a bit of complaining about the developers from high-level players. If you've been on Twitch, if you've been on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. I probably don't need to explain. If you haven't, I'm going to spare you the trouble. You don't need to worry too much about it. But I just want to bring some positivity to the table, because I think that the developers have been doing a fantastic job with balancing Deadlock. And honestly, making this new updated tier list was so difficult because I had to separate the characters into tiers that were honestly very difficult to do. I decided to separate it, instead of like S to D tier, from must pick / ban to very good to good and not very good, with the last tier being unplayable and having no characters in that tier. I legitimately do not think there is a single character that is not viable at the moment other than maybe Haze. And I would say that in the large majority of pub games, Haze is still totally playable. And even in tournament play, we've seen Haze win. Just in the fight night yesterday on the European teams picked Haze and made it look okay. Sure, it's not as good as the alternatives, but it's still totally fine. And it's highly possible that we haven't found all the optimal builds to play Haze yet. And this is what I want to talk about. I think that the development team has done a great job being reactive enough to nerf quickly the stuff that seems to be overpowered, as well as being slow enough to leave the stuff in that is probably overpowered, but that we're not sure about as a community. For example, Pocket's been known as overpowered for quite a long time, and he might still be overpowered, honestly. I put him in very good because I don't feel that he has as high of a draft priority as he did in the past, because I think there are characters that are just better. And Pocket's been nerfed so many times, but Valve didn't go all out with the nerfs. They didn't just nerf him to the ground right away. They went very gradually. Every Pocket nerf was very slight. First, they would nerf his abilities, and then in the same patches, they would nerf items that Pocket really likes. For example, one of the big reasons that Pocket fell out of favor this patch is because Majestic Leap got nerfed extremely significantly from a cooldown and utility perspective. And that's kind of the genius in the balancing, is that not only are they balancing the heroes, but you also have to think about the items that these heroes use. And I want to talk about that as well. As far as the items go, I think we're in such a great spot with so many items being viable, and items that in the past I thought were broken that are just very good. For example, in the past, I was convinced that if Divine Barrier didn't get changed, that it would be one of the most broken items in the game. And honestly, to this day, I still kind of think that. And yet, in gameplay, it's bought fairly often, but it's an item that has clear drawbacks. It falls off with time. If you buy it early, it feels really good, but when you have Divine Barrier 20-25 minutes into the game, it doesn't feel nearly impactful anymore. The same can be said for Reactive Barrier, another item that's extremely strong. Basically, all I'm trying to say is that I think that the devs have done a fantastic job at being reactive, but not overly reactive to all the player complaints and comments. I think that we as a community should be extremely grateful for the developers that we have for this game. Honestly, having patches on a 2-week schedule with tons of changes, new exciting content, new heroes. I mean, we just got 6 new heroes to test. What other game is out there doing this at the moment? I really can't think of a single one. And I know that transparency has not been Valve's strong suit in the past, but it seems that Deadlock's development team really cares about putting out the best content and being transparent about it. I mean, no other Valve development team has had a Discord server in which you can literally message the head of development, in this case Yoshi. I've known multiple people that have DM'd Yoshi about issues and that he's responded to them personally. Yoshi has personally responded to multiple of my forum posts about feedback that I've had on specific heroes or specific gameplay. And overall, I just think that every patch, we're heading in the right direction with balance. Sure, there are things that could be improved. For example, I think the earn mechanic right now feels a little bit off the mark. I don't think that they quite hit the mark with this, but they wanted a comeback mechanic that was a little bit easier, and therefore they made the earn changes. And I think that it's great to experiment with this stage in the game. I'm also not fully happy with the state of mid-boss. I think maybe some things need to be looked at for that. I'm not really happy about the Rejuvenator itself being the same buff as the minion buff. I think that they could be separate, but these are things to be discussed in another video. This video is more shown to highlight that every week, every patch, it becomes harder and harder for me to make a definitive tier list. And I think that there's always going to be characters that are more meta and characters that are more preferred, but I honestly believe that right now we're in a situation where nearly every character is viable, even in the highest of ranks. People always ask me, is Shiv gutted now? Is Shiv dead? And I think as a community, people tend to be way too reactive to nerfs. Shiv is significantly worse, yes, but I still believe that he's perfectly viable and perfectly fine. He's a good character. He just has a role that he fulfills, and he's not just a character that's going to become the server admin and carry the entire game. The only character that I think maybe needs to be looked at is Haze, because she gets so hard countered by items like Metal Skin, for example, that it feels very hard to be able to carry a game on her, as well as characters like Mirage. And Grey Talon seems to be, pretty obviously a little bit too strong, but I'm sure if they just tone it down a little bit, he'll come back to just being a sniper that's strong situationally and probably very strong at lower ranks, but less strong against experienced players that can counter it a little bit easier. Mirage does seem a little bit out of touch with the balance, simply because his global TP is extremely strong, as well as the fact that the rest of his kit has very little weaknesses. He has a ton of damage, he has an escape, he has damage over time with his 3. I mean, he just seems like ridiculously strong at the moment, but I believe that as the game develops and we get more characters that counters or offer similar things, characters like Mirage or Paradox will no longer be as much of a problem. The biggest problem with some of these characters right now is that there are no characters that offer a similar kit. For example, with Paradox, having swap to initiate fights is an extremely strong tool that really no other character in the game offers at the moment. It's basically a guaranteed initiation as long as you hit the carbine. And that's kind of the issue, is that there is no other character that can offer an initiation as reliably as Paradox. And so it's extremely high priority in draft because it fundamentally changes the way the game is played. Regardless, I think I've rambled on long enough about this. This video might not be the educational content that I usually post on this channel, but I haven't seen enough positivity about the balance changes that Deadlock developers have been making and the direction that the game has been going in. I fundamentally believe that we are going in a good direction for the game, and that the game is only getting healthier every patch. Even though some changes don't make sense at the moment, and even me, when I read the patch notes and I see that they buffed Mirage, for example, I'm like, this doesn't make sense, but that's okay, because 2 weeks later, I know that they'll fix it. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.